Anna says I'm going to be moving away from the directive and to look more at the processes that occur in science that might impinge on the way that the animal research is regulated. And I'm going to talk specifically about the effects in the publication process. So we had two objectives, pretty much what we just said, which is to look at the internal norms. And we're going to be focusing on journal publications. I'm going to give you two things today. I'm going to look at a systematic review that was done in a particular neurological disease. And what we're really trying to ask is how effective is self-regulation by the researchers. And the second thing that we did was to do a survey of biomedical journals to evaluate how animal welfare and implementation of the 3 Rs are reflected in the peer review process. So we're asking the question, to what extent do journals police animal experimentation, and to what extent should they do that? I'll come to that at the end. So the first part of this, how effective is self-regulation? There actually have been a number of systematic reviews done by Anna and Nuno, who is here somewhere, looking at Huntington's, for example, and in other fields looking at tuberculosis. And generally speaking, what the trend that's been seen is that there's an increase in the amount of self-reported regulatory compliance. And so the first question we wanted to ask was, is this applicable in other areas? Does that reported compliance correlate with actual changes in practice? And is there any evidence that field-specific self-regulation leads to changes in practice? So in fields where groups of researchers are concerned to regulate things themselves, are guidelines that they're using having any effect on practice? And the field in which we chose to do this was that of the study of motor neuron disease in animal models, specifically in mice, looking at this so-called SOD1 transgenic mouse. The reason we chose this field was because there's this widely accepted standard model, the SOD1 transgenic, that's used in a large number of studies, and both in proof of concept and in preclinical studies. By proof of concept, what I mean by that is essentially basic research where the objective of the study is to understand the mechanism of the disease. And that's as opposed to the preclinical study where the objective is to test the efficacy of the drug in the animal model with a view to going on to human studies. The other reason for picking motor neuron disease is it's a complex disease, and there's we know, for example, from the neuroscience, that there is uncertainty whether it is actually the neurons of the nervous system, the glial cells, or in fact the muscles of the body that are responsible for the disease. So there's a strong argument for looking at this as a whole organism model. There's also a great degree of scrutiny of the field, both ethical scrutiny. The model involves taking the mice to paralysis stages, so there's a great deal of scrutiny there. And there's also a great deal of scientific scrutiny of the rigor of the studies, because this is one of the fields where the translation to human studies has not been very successful. And finally, there's the community involved is clearly very responsive in the sense that they've gone and set up their own guidelines for how the research should be done. And this was done in 2007 and in 2010. And just in passing, I may refer to this as ALS, and that stands for amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, a different term for motor neuron disease. So that was why we chose this field. What about the guidelines that were set up? This was done voluntarily by a European and a US group working together based on some discussions in conferences in Holland in 2006 and 2009, giving the subsequent guidelines. It was driven, and I should emphasize this, not necessarily to improve animal welfare, but to improve the ability to try to translate from the mouse studies into effective drugs, because it was clear that different standards were being used in different models. It was aimed, therefore, at establishing minimum standards of experimental design, and as I say, not specifically aimed at improving welfare, although clearly in some cases those things overlap. And they were also very keen to get a distinction between these two terms that I've introduced you to, the idea of proof of concept studies versus preclinical studies, because particularly the patient group involved here was latching on to claims being made in proof of concept studies that were giving patients, if you like, false hope or overinflated hope about how effective a drug might be. And so they were very keen to get onto that. And that is the reference to that study down there for whoever's interested. The methodology we used was to find as many papers as we could that specifically dealt with this SOD1 model, and then to pick years that both preceded the appearance of the guidelines and followed the appearance of the guidelines. So we were trying to see if we could see the effect of the guidelines on the practice. So what did we find? The first thing we found was that, as in other studies, the level of reported regulatory compliance is clearly increasing over the period, and that's shown by the green dotted line here, which is a sum of these two different measures of compliance down here. One is of guidelines being followed in the blue versus protocols being approved in the red. And what you can clearly see is that there's a move from guidelines being followed towards people reporting that particular protocols have been approved. So that was consistent with other studies that had gone before. We also looked at the severity of the experiments that were being done, and this was using a severity scale from 1 to 5, where in the case of the SOD1 mouse, severity level of 4 is essentially the endpoint where the mouse has reached a state of paralysis where it's unable to right itself, the so-called righting reflex. And what you can see is that over the period of the study that we've done so far, there's no clear difference in the level of severity level 4 that's being reported. Importantly, of course, that wasn't actually the objective of the guidelines, that they were incorporating what was already an accepted endpoint for those kinds of studies. An interesting blip in this is that there was a significant increase in the number of studies in which it was not possible to classify the severity level because not enough detail of the experiments had been put into the papers. We don't know if this is significant in the terms of whether it's ongoing. We are actually carrying on the study into 2015 now, just to see if that's a consistent thing. We don't know what it means. What we did see was that although over time the reporting of experimental details and of measures to reduce noise and bias in the experiments, we didn't see a change over time, but we did see a very significant difference between proof of concept studies and preclinical studies. Very encouragingly, if you like, there was very significant differences in the measures that were taken to reduce noise and bias, and that's what you would hope to see in something that was trying to take these drugs into humans. Okay. The other thing that we noticed, and this is going to take me into the second part of the talk, is that if we grouped the journals into those that were demanding strict compliance, in other words, whether or not protocol approval had been attained was always stated, versus those in which that was less strict, we could see no clear correlation between those sets of journals that indicated that there was better reporting in the ones asking for stricter compliance. And that was leading us to the question of whether that actually, whether or not that means editors and reviewers take those issues seriously when deciding which ones to publish. So we picked up on that and said, well, actually, can we tell how well editorial staff and reviewers are using the experimental details in deciding whether or not to publish a study. So the second part of the talk is switching to that, looking at the role of journals in this process. And the question we're asking is, to what extent do editors take into account animal welfare and the 3 R's during the peer review process? The way we went about doing this was to first try to identify all the papers on animal research that have been published using the EuroPMC database, and we identified using these search terms up here about 17,000 articles that have been published since 1994. And from those, we extracted the numbers of papers per journal and then ranked the journals accordingly. And I've tried to illustrate this in this graph here. What the graph is showing you in the blue is the numbers of papers up here, in this case 1,100 or so, that are publishing the numbers of studies down below. So this is saying that there were about 1,100 journals that were publishing 1 to 4 papers over that period since 1994. So these journals are infrequently publishing animal studies, whereas you go to the other extreme over here, and you find that there's a single journal over here which is publishing as many as 1,280 papers over that period. And that journal alone, as is shown in the red, constitutes about 15% of all the papers published. So a point to make here is that the journals that are on, if you like, the left-hand side of the screen are making a much bigger impact on the field. So we've concentrated on those toward the left. As I said, we ranked these, and we picked the top 800 of these to try and poll a survey from. So we presented them with an email questionnaire. We emailed 800 of them. We got responses from about 119, well, from exactly 119. We would have liked more, but actually, when we've done some analysis of the representation amongst those journals, they seem, at least by their impact factors, I should explain, because we did this anonymously, we didn't want to have the journals have to identify themselves. We did it anonymously, but we could identify at least broadly things like impact factor and other aspects. So by impact factor distribution, we think this is broadly representative of the total set. So bearing that in mind, what did we find? Who were the respondents? Well, 87% of them were editors-in-chief, with 65% of them trained in basic research, 13 clinical. 59% had more than 10 years experience working with animals. Interestingly, 21% had none. 75% were male, 79% were over 50. The majority were publishing only life science papers. The majority covered both clinical and basic science. Most of them were in the USA, 46% of them, 25% in the UK, and a further 16% in these countries here in Europe. There were other countries around the world. The majority were reviewing at least 10 papers a month in animal experimentation, and 24% of them were as many as 30 a month. So I think we've captured quite a significant a part of the publishing base here. Okay, so our analysis of this is still ongoing, so what I'm just going to give you is a couple of tasters along the way and some highlights and a couple of examples. So I think the first thing I can say is that the animal welfare is taken seriously by journals. I think this top line here, that more than 25% of the respondents reject manuscripts often or sometimes because of insufficient measures taken to protect animal welfare being evident in the papers. So that was a big surprise to me. I did not expect to see that level of rejection on that basis. Perhaps more typically, 80%, greater than 80% of the respondents considers that measures taken to reduce suffering and discomfort as important or very important, which is shown in the graph here, and more than 95% require a statement indicating that ethical approval has been obtained. So those last two are perhaps less surprising. We did ask the question, does the journal check the veracity of these statements of ethical approval? And what you can see is that actually a good proportion of the journals do check that, particularly if there are concerns about the research that's being reported. The other interesting thing was we asked if an online database of ethical approvals were available, whether people would use that, and as you can see here, clearly a large number of people would. So that's an interesting thought, I think, for the future. We noted that the guidance provided to authors of papers was actually significantly greater than the guidance provided to the reviewers. So the authors had to use mandatory use of guidance is required, less so with the reviewers. We have a little bit of inkling of the directive having an influence, in the sense that we could see that a number of the respondents said that the EU directive had been used as a basis on which their guidelines to authors were written. And of those journals that were based in Europe, you can see that a good proportion of them said that the directive had influenced editorial policies. So the directive is having some influence there. There was a clear dichotomy in the response, amongst the response, about the selection of reviewers with expertise in animal ethics, in animal research ethics. So it's quite encouraging that a substantial number of the respondents said that that including animal research ethics expertise amongst the reviewers was very important. But you can see also that there's a substantial group of journals in which they consider that not at all important. So an interesting split amongst the respondents there. We asked the question, who should be responsible for ensuring animal welfare? And, well, the scientists clearly, apparently. Ethics committees next, then national agencies here. The guys who are clearly not supposed to be responsible are the guys who are running the journal. But, in fairness, you'll note that actually that's again a split. There's clearly a group of journals that do think that this is important and part of their remit. Others less so. Okay. We tried to do some correlation across the data, and here's just one example. So we asked if somebody had replied that they attend to meetings and lectures on the principles of the 3 R's, that meant that their journal was more likely to have a required checklist amongst the reviewers. Whereas the opposite is true. And this wasn't just this one thing, we saw several criteria that seemed to indicate that the interest of the editors in the 3 R's reflected in the journal's policy. So education matters, and that's interesting in the light also of a couple of Swiss studies that have just been published, where researchers were polled as to their awareness of the ARRIVE guidelines, and it turns out that those who are more aware of the ARRIVE guidelines are much more likely to reduce bias in their experiments and try to take measures to get rid of subjective bias. So education really matters. So conclusions: a substantial proportion of journals take animal welfare seriously enough to reject papers on that basis. Reporting of regulatory compliance is increasing, but the journals might like some help in verifying compliance. The directive is clearly having some effect on journal behaviours. Education matters, and journals are split about whether or not they should be the ones who are policing the compliance. So this work was done between Anna's group in Portugal, particularly Joanna and Nuno were involved, Nuno particularly in the ALS studies with Joanna, and Joanna with the questionnaire. And Andy Grierson was, my colleague over there, was involved in this as well. And we had lots of help from these people here, particularly from Jesper and Augusto in trialling the questionnaire, and from these guys in identifying the journals. Thank you very much.